The biggest mistake that people make when it comes to rear delt training and growth is only doing rows and pull downs and assuming that that is enough to grow the rear delt. Now, I'm going to explain why that's my opinion, and I'm going to also explain what I did to work around that problem, what exercise I chose to grow my rear delts, because now I have no trouble targeting them, no trouble feeling them, no trouble making them sore, no trouble getting a fat pump in them, and it's all thanks to one principle of physics and biomechanics. So just real quick, what is the function of the rear delt? It's really simple. The rear delt runs along this border and attaches to the back of the arm. Okay, so all it's gonna do is it's gonna pull the arm kind of outward to the side. Many of you know this, okay, rear delt fly, cool. But many of you don't know why you're not feeling and connecting with your rear delt, and it has to do with two major things. One is force, and the second is joints and joint position and joint motion. So let's talk about the second briefly first. In rows and pull downs, remember that first thing I said, in rows and pull downs, there is a lot of this motion happening, a lot of sliding. Okay, what is this sliding controlled by? This sliding is controlled by these lats and these rhomboids and these traps. All the muscles that attach to the shoulder blade and the arm that can move all of these bones together are going to be the ones that dominate pretty much any kind of row, whether it's a narrow row or even a slightly wider row, unless you're super intentional about what you do with your shoulders, because there's just so much motion of the shoulder blade that so much of the actual muscle contraction that needs to contribute to resisting something that is pulling your arms forward. Think about it this way, your shoulder blades, your arms, they're being pulled off your body. So even if you're doing like a wider row, your traps need to be on the entire time, whereas your rear delts only really need to start to kick in toward the end of a row, thinking of a dumbbell row or a cable row typically. So that's the reason that a row might not feel like a lot of rear delts. It's just that there's a lot of this motion, and when there's a lot of this motion, as different and as separate from this motion, right, you have a lot more traps and a lot more lats. Okay, that's number one. Number two, if you imagine a pull down, the same thing is true. There's so much elevation and depression in a pull down. There's so much upward and downward rotation. And also you have to keep in mind that when those functions and those motions are at play, muscles like the lats that can do both this and this together, that can resist all the things in a pull down, those are going to do the most amount of work. So even with a wide row, even with a narrow row, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes the rear delt is kind of left with a lot less stimulus. And if you do that perpetually, it's no wonder that your rear delts are not growing at the same rate as these other tissues that you're really isolating and focusing on. So that's sort of problem number one. It's just a lot of the joint motion that's occurring during rows and pull downs is occurring through this sliding and this rotating stuff, all of these bones, rather than just fixing these two and moving this, which is what we need for the rear delts. So could you manufacture a row or a pull down where you're really, hyper focused on keeping your shoulder blade still? Yes, but I think there's a simpler solution, and that is to manipulate the force direction, which is the first thing I mentioned. So what do we do to manipulate the force so that it's pretty much like an only rear delt thing? Well, it's very simple in some ways, but for whatever reason, I don't see very many people applying this concept, which is basically just to load your arm across your face, and not just across your face, but kind of like behind your face, right? Because think about what happens. If I move the arm like this, just kind of in this window in front of my body, let's say to my opposite side ear and, somewhere out here, basically all that can really occur is motion of this joint right here, motion of what we really want to be moving in any kind of rear delt exercise, which is pretty much where only the rear delt can contribute, especially if you have a resistance that is pulling you directly backward. So my number one option for rear delts for those reasons, just basically anchor a cable behind you. It doesn't have to be perfectly behind you, so it doesn't need to be pulling perfectly backward. But what you ideally want is some kind of backward-ish direction and some kind of across-ish direction. And the way that I like to sort of find this slot, so to speak, is basically to take my biceps and drag my biceps inward toward my face. So I'm almost like hitting myself in the eye and in the nose. And then wherever the hand is, that's where I'm going to basically set the cable and then pull down from. You want this angle not to be perfectly horizontal like this, as I was kind of just demonstrating to show the concepts. You probably want the angle to be a little bit high to low, because a little bit high to low is going to bring in a little bit more of the rear delt and less so of the middle delt. If you saw my video from a couple days ago, I did a video on middle delts and how this is like one of my favorite exercises to kind of train the back half. So like the middle / rear delt. But the way that you basically move the bias more toward the rear delt and less toward the middle delt is by making the angle slightly high to low. So it's not like a high to low lat thing, which would be narrow to your body the whole time and like you're unshrugging your shoulder the whole time. It's more like a slightly high to low diagonal thing where the load is kind of pulling across you and backward, and where you are pulling outward toward the side like that. It's kind of like a sweeping action. Now, the one thing I would recommend is for you to play around with your chest position. So some people naturally, they feel really, really good just cranking themselves into the position, just getting that sort of deep stretch with the cable pulling them this way and just using the range of motion until the cable basically hits their face. Other people, they feel better not as cranked into the arm. They feel better kind of just facing maybe a little bit more toward the cable where they can contract the rear delt in a little bit more of a squeeze position. Both of those are fantastic. Both of those are fine. And I would recommend you try both of them if you've never done this type of motion, this type of loading before. Anyway, the question is also like, well, how do I do this with a dumbbell? What if I don't have access to cables? You came to the right place, because a simple way to set this up on a dumbbell type setup is to angle a bench maybe at a lower-ish incline, and basically just try to set the forces up in a very similar way. You could also probably do this at a flat angle and basically just grab a dumbbell, crank your arm in that direction and face maybe slightly toward the side so that you can really maximize that stretch and really maximize for the loading. Because again, the loading being across and backward is going to really make it heavier in that position, unlike the problem with the rows and the pull downs that we run into, which is that rows, even wide rows, where they really are only heavy here. And by the time you're getting here, your traps tend to be super, super tired. Again, unless you're very, very good and skilled at manipulating that upper arm position. So overall, if you want to do the dumbbell variation, it's fine. It's not my preference. My cable setup that I showed earlier is my preference. You could also do this on a rear delt machine where you're basically using one side at a time. And when I say rear delt machine, I just mean reverse pec deck, where you're basically setting up in the same way, where you kind of are leaning your body slightly this way so you can pull at that slightly high to low angle. I would really, really recommend, if you're confused about any of this lifting stuff, check out my exercise library at the link in the description. Tons and tons of people, over 4,500 people, have used this library and trust this library and like this library. It'll take the confusion out of lifting instantly, or you don't have to involve yourself in all this guesswork. I've done all the hard anatomy-based stuff for you, so you can just click in, go to whatever sort of module you want, find the muscle group you want, especially for the rear delts. You'll have a ton of options just for the rear delt in there that are different from the ones that I showed here. So I hope you all enjoyed the video. If you have any specific questions, please leave them in the comments, and I'll see you all in the next one.